The sun lowered itself across the wide plains, casting long shadows across the dry earth as the wind carried dust into the air and brushed against the edges of the old town of Red Hollow. A quiet unease settled over the place, and every soul within its borders seemed to feel the shift except perhaps the young woman standing behind the blacksmith's shop, her heart thundering in her chest. Anna Ward lived her 19 years in the steady rhythm of her father's anvil, their world filled with sweat, iron, and the scent of smoldering coals. Her father, Thomas Ward, was known by every rancher for miles around, a man of unwavering principles and hard work, yet burdened with debt after too many seasons of drought and failed crops, and now in a moment of desperation he had agreed to something Anna feared more than the storms of winter or the threats of drought. He had promised her hand to the wealthy rancher Marston Hale. Marston Hale was a man of means with land that stretched so far the horizon bowed beneath its weight. He owned cattle mines, water rights, and the loyalty of half the county. His name could silence a room, and though he was powerful, he was also known for a coldness that settled over him like frost over a grave. He was 20 years older than Anna, and though she knew her father needed help, she could not bring herself to accept a life chained to a man whose gaze felt like a locked door with no key. Anna stood with her hands pressed against the rough wooden boards of the shop, and she breathed deeply, feeling the weight of her future closing around her like a tightening rope. She had always dreamed of freedom, of seeing the world beyond Red Hollow, of loving someone who loved her back, someone who saw her not as property, not as a solution, but as a living, breathing soul. That dream seemed to fade with every passing hour. From the road came the sound of hooves, slow, steady, and calm. Anna turned her eyes, lifting her gaze from the dust, just as a lone horse and rider came into view. The man sat tall, though quiet in presence. He wore a weathered hat pulled low, a coat that hung dusted from travel, and a calmness that seemed at odds with the restless wind. His name was Colt Avery, though few knew much about him. Stories followed him like drifting embers. Some said he was a drifter who never stayed longer than a season. Others said he had once been a soldier. Others swore he had lost everything in a border raid and carried silence like a wound. But no matter what tale reached the ears of the town, everyone agreed on one thing: Colt Avery had kindness in his eyes, the kind that did not demand attention but quietly offered it. Anna watched him dismount near the shop, leading his horse with a slow, steady cadence. Her father greeted him with a nod, for Colt often brought broken gear, loose horseshoes, and work that paid honestly. But today Colt sensed something different in the air. His eyes shifted to Anna, who stood half-shadowed by the building, and he felt the tremor in the world around her before she even spoke. Colt stepped closer, his voice gentle, though she did not look at him at first. "Anna, are you all right?" She swallowed hard, the words trapped in her throat, until she forced them out. "I am not," she whispered. The whisper was too soft a word. Her voice trembled just enough for Colt to understand that whatever weighed on her was not small, not temporary. She lifted her eyes to him, and he saw the fear held tight behind her lashes, the kind of fear born not from danger but from being trapped with no way out. "My father promised me to Marston Hale," she finally said. "He comes tomorrow to take me to his ranch." The wind stilled, as if listening. The world seemed to hold its breath. Colt understood instantly. For a moment he said nothing, simply studying the young woman who stood before him, small in frame, yes, but strong, fierce, determined, desperate for her life to be her own. He saw all of that and more, and something inside him shifted like a horse turning toward home. "Do you want to go?" Colt asked, though he already knew the answer. Anna shook her head, her hands tightening into fists. "I would rather run into the desert and never return than live under Marston Hale." Colt exhaled, slow, thoughtful, deliberate. He was not a man who involved himself in business that was not his yet. As he looked at Anna, he felt the pull of something stronger than logic, a pull toward justice, toward compassion, toward protecting someone who had never been given a chance. "If you run," he said, "your father will face hell for it. Marston will punish him more than you." Anna lowered her head, tears burning at the edges of her vision. "I know I cannot stay, and I cannot leave without destroying him." Colt stood still, letting the truth settle before he spoke again. "What if you had help? What if you did not run alone?" Anna lifted her gaze, surprised, breathless, hopeful for the first time in days. "Help from who?" "From me," Colt said simply, his voice a steady promise. Anna felt her heart shift. If Colt Avery was offering help, then maybe the horizon was not closed, maybe she still had a chance at freedom. And so, as the last light of day faded, Anna made her choice, a choice that would change both their lives forever. The sun dipped low over the open plains, casting long golden rays across the tall grass as the quiet cowboy rode toward the small creek that wound gently through the valley. His horse moved at an easy pace, hooves brushing dust into the warm evening air. The cowboy, named Colt, felt the weight of the long day settle on his shoulders, though he kept his expression calm, his eyes scanning the land with practiced instinct. The world felt wide and empty, as it often did until the moment he saw her. Lila the blacksmith's daughter was making her way along the creek, her skirt brushing through wildflowers that dotted the bank. Her steps were unsteady, as though her thoughts were heavier than her feet. She carried a small bundle of herbs gathered for her father. Though she barely noticed the scent rising from her hands, her mind was fixed on the future set for her. The future she did not choose. The wealthy rancher Royce Carver had spoken with her father that morning, and the arrangement was nearly sealed. Her chest tightened each time she remembered his cold eyes assessing her as if she were another piece of land he intended to buy. She knelt beside the creek, splashing cool water onto her face, hoping it would wash away the dread coiling inside her. The breeze trembled through the willow branches overhead, whispering to her the same truth she had been fighting all day. She did not want that life. She did not want that man. She wanted freedom. She wanted choice, even if it meant risking everything. Colt slowed his horse as he approached the gentle curve of the creek. He had noticed her long before she noticed him, even from a distance. Her posture spoke of burden and fear, something he knew all too well. He did not intend to intrude, so he guided his horse to the far side of the water, planning to pass quietly and give her space. But the moment he reached the bank, his horse nudged its head toward her, letting out a soft huff that carried across the still meadow. Lila turned, alarmed, standing quickly. Her eyes met Colt's, and for a moment the world fell silent around them. She saw a man with gentle strength, a man who carried sorrow in his stance but kindness in his gaze. Colt saw a young woman fighting back fear, standing tall even as her hands trembled around the bundle of herbs between her fingers. "Sorry to startle you," Colt said, though his tone came without harshness. His voice was low, steady like the creek beside them. Lila relaxed, only slightly, recognizing that he meant no harm. She had seen him in town before, quiet, polite, always helping others but never staying long enough to invite conversation. He was a mystery to many, and yet in that moment she felt safer with him than she had felt all week. "You did not startle me," she said, though her voice quivered faintly. Colt studied her carefully, sensing that there was something she was holding back, something painful. He dismounted slowly, leading his horse by the reins so as not to frighten her. He kept a respectful distance, waiting for her to breathe easily again. Lila glanced at him, unsure why she felt compelled to speak to him, but the silence between them was warm, not heavy. She found herself admitting, "I had a difficult morning." Her words came out soft, nearly swallowed by the rush of water. Colt did not press, but his steady presence invited truth. "My father has decided something for me," she continued, staring at the water. "He thinks it is for the best, but I do not." Colt took in her words quietly, understanding more than she knew. He had seen many forced choices on the frontier, choices made in the name of security but costing freedom, happiness, or even safety. "What do you want?" he asked simply, because he knew the question mattered more than any answer she could give. Lila froze, eyes filling with emotion. She fought to hide. No one had asked her that, not her father, not the rancher who claimed her future, certainly not herself. "I want to choose my own life," she whispered. "I want to be more than a promise traded between men." Colt nodded, and though he offered no solution in that moment, the understanding in his gaze steadied her like a hand she did not realize she needed. The wind rose, carrying the scent of sage through the valley. A quiet settled between them, a quiet full of possibility, full of unspoken fear, full of something new that neither dared name. Yet as the last light of day touched the water, both felt the moment shift, as if fate itself paused, watching them, watching the first fragile thread that tied their futures together. Lila exhaled slowly, relief easing her shoulders. A chance encounter perhaps, but one that settled deep inside her like the first spark of hope. Colt mounted his horse again, giving her a gentle nod before preparing to ride on, but Lila felt a pull in her chest, a pull toward him, toward safety, toward freedom. She did not know why, not yet, but she knew she would remember this moment. And Colt, as he rode away, felt something in his heart stir, a quiet realization that the girl by the creek was someone whose path might change his own, someone he wanted to protect even if he did not yet understand from what, someone he would not soon forget. The sun slipped beyond the horizon, leaving them both with the memory of a single moment carved into the quiet plains, a moment neither knew would shape everything that came next. Ella woke before the sun, her thoughts heavy as the distant hills slowly brightened with the first pale light of morning. She sat on the edge of her small bed, her hands resting on her lap, her mind replaying the words she wished she could forget. She knew that once the sun climbed high enough, her father would be standing at her doorway, wearing the same stern expression he always used when a decision had been made. Without her, she felt the weight of that knowledge crushing her chest like invisible stone. She moved quietly through the house, her bare feet brushing the cool wooden floor. She prepared coffee for her father and her younger brother, and as she worked she tried to steady her breathing, telling herself that maybe there was still time, maybe the wealthy rancher would change his mind, or maybe her father would see her fear and soften. But none of those hopes felt real, not when she knew how desperately her father believed this marriage would save them. The sound of boots on the floorboards made Ella stiffen. Her father entered the room, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, nodding at her and taking the cup she had poured. She could tell he was nervous, though he tried to hide it. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, as if he was waiting for her to speak first, but she kept her eyes low and continued cooking because she knew what he wanted to say, and she knew she was not ready to hear it. By the time the sun rose fully, the air felt too warm, too heavy. The day already carrying the heat of late summer. Ella stood on the porch staring toward the dusty road that led into town. She knew he would be coming, the wealthy rancher, her supposed future husband, the man who barely looked at her when their families first met, yet spoke confidently about cattle profits, land expansion, and the benefits of having a quiet, obedient wife. She felt a cold shiver race along her spine, though the morning was warm. Her father stepped outside, clearing his throat. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. She flinched but did not pull away because she understood the pressure he felt. She just wished he understood hers. He told her that this proposal was a blessing, that she should be grateful that someone of such standing would want her, that this marriage meant stability and safety. He spoke softly, but every word rang hollow in her ears because she did not feel chosen. She felt traded. The sound of hooves carried across the road. The rancher's stallion was a tall, sleek animal kicking up dust as it slowed. The man himself wore a vest too fine for a working cowboy, and his hat cast a shadow across eyes that always seemed to evaluate rather than admire. He dismounted slowly, giving Ella a calculated stare before nodding politely at her father. The rancher had money, land, reputation. He had everything but warmth, and she felt it immediately, like standing near a fire that gave off no heat. He approached Ella with an air of certainty, as if the world already belonged to him, and soon she would too. He spoke in a smooth, controlled voice, telling her father that he was ready to discuss arrangements. Then he turned to Ella, offering her a small box tied with ribbon, not out of affection but out of obligation. She opened it with trembling hands, revealing a delicate gold brooch shaped like a flower. Though it sparkled beautifully, it felt heavier than iron in her palm. Her father urged her to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. The rancher seemed to notice her hesitation, and his smile thinned slightly, as if he was unused to anything other than immediate obedience. He told her that he would take good care of her, that she would want for nothing, that he expected her to move to his estate within a fortnight once preparations were complete. His voice was calm, but it settled over her like chains she did not ask for. Ella felt something crumble inside her. She managed a nod, but her vision blurred and her breath hitched. She wanted to run into the fields where no one could see her, hide her cry beneath the wide open sky, but she stood still, her feet heavy, anchored by fear and duty. The rancher seemed satisfied, giving her father a firm handshake before turning his horse back toward town, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. As soon as he disappeared from sight, Ella ran toward the barn, desperate to be alone. The smell of hay and horses wrapped around her as she sank to the floor, her tears falling silently. She pressed her hands to her face, whispering a wish she barely believed in, that somehow, some way, her life would not be decided by men who never asked what she wanted. She had no idea that fate had already begun to shift, that a quiet cowboy had already noticed her fear on the road the day before, and that he would change everything. The sun dipped low over the quiet hills, washing the valley in soft gold as Elena paced the small clearing behind the blacksmith shop, her breath uneven and her steps restless. She kept glancing toward the dusty trail, hoping, praying that the cowboy would return, because she knew deep in her bones that tonight would shape the rest of her life. The weight of the arranged marriage pressed on her chest like a stone, making every moment feel tighter and every breath harder. The rancher had sent word earlier that morning, reminding her father that the wedding would happen on the next full moon, leaving her less than a week to either surrender to her fate or break every rule she had ever lived by. She could not do this alone, and though she hardly knew the cowboy, she felt strangely safe around him, as if his calm presence had become the one steady thing in a world that was shifting beneath her feet. The breeze rustled through the tall grass, carrying the scent of horses and the faint, distant hum of life moving on without her. She closed her eyes, trying to gather courage, when the sound of slow hoofbeats touched her ears. She spun around, hope blooming in her chest, as the cowboy rode into view, his posture steady, his expression unreadable. The warm evening light outlined him, making him appear as if carved from the very earth that raised men like him, strong, quiet, purposeful. He dismounted without a word, studying her face as if searching for the truth behind her worry. Elena felt her breath shake as she finally spoke, though the words carried no punctuation in her mind. Each thought felt jagged. "I cannot marry him," she said, her voice soft but filled with desperation. "They will not listen to me. They say it is already decided." The cowboy nodded slowly, as though he had expected this, as though he had seen resignation like hers before in other towns, other frightened hearts. He motioned for her to walk with him toward the fading light, and the two moved side by side through the clearing, their steps quiet in the tall grass. Finally he stopped at a fallen log near the river, a calm place where decisions seemed to settle, the wind barely stirring. He looked at her, eyes steady and gentle, and said, "We need a plan, not just fear, not running blindly, but something that will get you away from him without hurting your family more than necessary." She looked down, her hands trembling. She had never imagined a stranger would be the one helping her rewrite her destiny. Together they began working through the possibilities. Slowly, carefully, Elena explained that the rancher watched her father closely and sent men to the shop every day. She could not simply vanish, or thieves or drifters would be blamed, and her father punished. The cowboy listened with patience, mapping out routes in the dirt with the end of a broken branch, showing her hidden trails, rivers, narrow passes, and abandoned cabins where she could wait safely until she reached the stage station at Red Hollow. From there she could leave the territory entirely or find a small settlement where no one knew her name. But leaving meant saying goodbye to her father, a thought that twisted her heart painfully. The cowboy saw the sorrow in her eyes and gently touched her arm, offering reassurance. He told her that every person deserved a choice, even if the world tried to steal it from them, and he said something that struck her deeply, that sometimes leaving was not the same as abandoning, and sometimes staying was a slow, quiet death. Elena felt a warmth grow in her chest, a mix of courage and something else, something she did not dare name yet. As twilight wrapped around them, he explained how the plan could work. He would come for her on the night before the full moon. During the hours when even watchful eyes grew tired, he would bring a second horse, sturdy, quiet, and fast. They would travel by the old canyon road, hidden by rock walls and shadows. Once they reached the river pass, they would cut across the ridge where trackers avoided because of loose stone. He spoke with certainty, each step measured, as though he had walked those paths many times before. She listened, absorbing every detail, committing it to memory, until the plan no longer felt like a fragile hope but something real, something possible. Fear still tugged at her heart, but it no longer ruled her. She felt something shift inside, a spark that had been buried beneath duty and expectation, finally allowed to breathe. The cowboy noticed the steadiness in her gaze and nodded, as if telling her silently that she was stronger than she believed. Night settled around them, cool and deep, fireflies flickering near the river, and Elena felt a strange peace. Despite the danger that lay ahead, she turned to the cowboy, grateful beyond words, and he held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Not yet love, not yet certainty, but the beginning of something fierce and undeniable. She knew then that she would follow this plan, not because she was running, but because she was choosing a future that belonged to her. And as the stars gathered above them, the escape plan was set, and the first breath of freedom touched her soul. The moon hung low over the open prairie, casting a silver ribbon across the land as Emma clung to the saddle behind Cole, her fingers tight against the worn leather. The horse moved with desperate urgency, hooves drumming into the earth like a heartbeat, echoing their fear and their hope. The air smelled of sagebrush and dust, the night wide and endless around them. The wind tore through Emma's hair, and every jolt of the horse reminded her that she was leaving behind everything she had ever known. Cole kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, his shoulders tense, his jaw set in a fierce line. He rode with quiet purpose, each movement steady and controlled. He had escaped danger before, but never with someone he cared for, someone who trusted him enough to flee into the vast night. But he did not let himself dwell on that thought, not now, not when every shadow behind them threatened to be one of Harper's hired men. Emma looked back once over her shoulder, the ranch lights shrinking into the distance until they became nothing more than faint specks swallowed by darkness. Her breath trembled in her chest. She knew there was no turning back. If Harper's men caught them, she would be dragged back to the life she feared, a life chosen for her, not by her, and Cole would pay the price for daring to defy a man with wealth and power. The night air cooled her burning cheeks, and she leaned closer to Cole, finding comfort in the steady rise and fall of his breath. He did not speak, but she felt the unspoken promise in every careful movement. He would not let anything happen to her. They rode for miles across the silent prairie, the moon guiding their path like a guardian above. Cole finally slowed the horse when the ground dipped into a hidden arroyo sheltered between rolling hills. He pulled the reins softly, and the horse eased to a stop, breathing hard. Emma slid carefully to the ground, her legs shaking from the long, relentless ride. She steadied herself, one hand on the saddle, the other pressed lightly against her chest. She felt the thundering rhythm of her own pulse, a reminder of the fear that chased them and the courage that carried her forward. Cole scanned the horizon, every sense alert, listening for distant hoofbeats. The world was quiet, only the soft whisper of wind through dry grass filling the space between them. He exhaled slowly, the tension easing. For a moment they could rest here, but only for a short while. Emma brushed her hands over her dress and stepped closer to him, her voice gentle though stripped of the fear that had gripped her earlier. She asked if they were safe for now. Cole nodded and finally met her gaze. In the pale moonlight she saw the weariness in his eyes, but also the steady determination that had kept them ahead of danger. He told her they had a good lead on Harper's men, but they needed to keep moving before dawn. She thanked him, her voice quiet but full of trembling sincerity. Cole looked away for a moment as if unsure how to take her gratitude. Emma had never met a man like him, a man who risked everything for someone who had nothing to offer in return except trust. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she would not forget this night or the man who carried her through it. Cole removed his hat and ran a hand through his wind-tangled hair. Then he offered her a small canteen. Emma drank the cool water gratefully, feeling it soothe her dry throat. She looked at the sky, at the wide-open world that no longer felt like a cage but like a path leading somewhere new, somewhere she had chosen. A coyote cried in the distance, a long, lonely sound drifting across the prairie. Cole tensed again, listening, but the cry faded, replaced by the steady rustling of night creatures. He rested his hand on Emma's shoulder, briefly grounding her, reminding her she was not alone. She felt a spark of strength rise within her, a spark she had not known she possessed until Cole showed her another way forward. After a short rest, Cole lifted her back onto the horse, then swung into the saddle behind her. His arms framed her securely, and she felt the warmth of his presence. The horse started forward again, carrying them deeper into the night toward the mountains where Harper's influence could not reach. The horizon glowed faintly as the first hint of dawn began to form. Cole urged the horse faster, knowing daylight would bring danger. Emma leaned back against him, her fear slowly giving way to something new, something steady, something that felt like the beginning of freedom. Together they rode into the widening light, the night behind them, the uncertain future unfolding ahead, step by determined step. The sun rose slowly over the hills, casting long shadows across the town. Clara stood at the edge of the dusty street, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent days hiding and running, yet now the moment she had feared had arrived. Mason, the wealthy rancher she had been promised, approached with a group of men, his boots kicking up clouds of dust as he strode forward. His presence was commanding, his eyes cold and determined, and the whispers of the townsfolk followed behind him. Luke stepped forward, standing tall beside Clara, his hand resting near the revolver at his hip, yet his stance calm, confident, and protective. The tension in the air was thick, the heat of the sun adding weight to the moment. Every villager in the nearby street had paused to watch their confrontation, as if the town itself held its breath, waiting for the outcome. Mason stopped a few paces away, his eyes scanning both Clara and Luke, a calculating expression crossing his face. Clara felt a surge of fear and determination, her fingers curling lightly against her sides. She would not allow herself to be taken back to a life she did not choose. She had trusted Luke with her escape, with her safety, and now with her heart. She looked into his eyes and saw unwavering resolve, a promise that he would not let anything harm her. That silent reassurance steadied her nerves and gave her courage to stand tall in the face of Mason's intimidation. Mason spoke first, his voice deep and cold, carrying across the quiet street. "Clara, you have no right to run from me," he said, and his words made the air seem heavier. His men shifted their weight and murmured in agreement, yet Luke did not move back, his gaze steady and his posture unwavering. "You will not take her," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of authority and conviction. The townsfolk whispered among themselves, sensing the stakes and feeling the tension that crackled between the three figures. Clara stepped slightly forward, her own voice quiet yet firm. "I will not marry you, Mason. I do not want your wealth or your control, and I will not be forced into a life I do not choose." Her words were met with a flicker of surprise in Mason's eyes, a brief hesitation that gave her a small sense of relief, yet she knew the danger had not passed. The defiance in her tone carried a power she had never known before, a newfound strength fueled by the support and love of Luke standing beside her. Luke moved slightly closer, positioning himself between Mason and Clara, his eyes never leaving Mason's face. The quiet tension of the moment seemed to stretch for minutes, as if the world itself had paused to watch the confrontation unfold. The wind stirred the dust around them, and the sun glinted off the metal of Luke's revolver, adding a subtle reminder of the consequences of crossing him. Mason narrowed his eyes, calculating the risk, his jaw tightening as he considered his options. For a moment the street was silent except for the soft shuffle of boots and the distant calls of the townsfolk. Some of the onlookers whispered in shock, admiration, and anticipation, while others feared what might happen next. The confrontation had drawn the attention of everyone, and the outcome would set the course for the future of Clara and Luke, their escape and their chance at a life together. Finally Mason took a step back, his expression hardening yet his pride slightly bruised. He spoke slowly, his words tinged with warning and restrained anger. "This is not over," he said, "but for now you may go." His men muttered and shuffled behind him, creating space for Clara and Luke to move safely away. The weight of the encounter lingered in the air, the tension of the confrontation leaving behind a mixture of relief and adrenaline. Clara let out a quiet breath she had been holding and turned to Luke, her eyes shining with gratitude and fear and excitement. His hand found hers and squeezed gently, a silent affirmation that they had survived the first great challenge together. Their journey was far from over yet. The bond between them had strengthened, the courage and determination they shared had solidified, and the possibility of freedom and love felt more real than ever. The sun continued its climb over the hills, bathing the town in warm light, and the streets slowly returned to normal. Yet Clara and Luke knew the day had changed everything. The confrontation with Mason was a reminder of the dangers that lingered, yet also a testament to their strength and unity. Together they could face whatever threats came their way, their hearts aligned and their resolve unbroken. As they walked away from the street and back toward the hills, the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and earth, their footsteps light yet determined. Clara felt a deep sense of relief and anticipation for the days ahead. She knew there would be more challenges, more confrontations, and more moments that would test their courage. Yet standing beside Luke, she felt invincible, ready to face the world and carve out a life of freedom, love, and choice. The hills of Red Mesa stretched out before them, the golden light of the afternoon bathing the landscape in warmth. Clara and Luke moved together, their hands intertwined, their hearts aligned in the memory of the confrontation with Mason, serving as both a warning and a reminder of the bond they had forged in the life they were determined to create together. The sky darkened over Red Mesa, heavy clouds rolling in from the west and the wind picking up speed. Clara and Luke pressed on through the open fields, the distant hills blurred by the approaching storm. Their clothes clung to their bodies, the air thick with humidity and tension as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. The journey had been long, the encounter with Mason still fresh in their minds, and now nature itself seemed to challenge their escape. Luke led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of shelter. His hand gripped Clara's, firmly guiding her through the uneven terrain across rocks and shallow gullies. Their pace quickened as the rain began to fall harder, soaking the earth and turning it to mud around their boots. Each step was a test of balance and endurance, yet neither faltered, their determination fueled by necessity and the desire for freedom. Clara shivered both from the cold and from the adrenaline that surged through her veins. She held tightly to Luke's arm, feeling the steady warmth of his presence and the reassurance it offered. They exchanged few words, letting the rhythm of their footsteps and the sound of the storm guide their movements. The wind howled across the plains and the rain pelted their faces, yet the bond between them held firm, a tether of trust and courage that neither the storm nor the fear could sever. In the distance, a rocky outcrop jutted from the hillside, offering the promise of temporary shelter. Luke pointed toward it, and together they navigated the slippery path winding through wet grass and loose stones. The sound of rushing water from a nearby creek added to the cacophony of the storm, yet it also guided them toward safety. A flash of lightning illuminated the landscape for a brief moment, revealing the contours of the rocks and the shelter they sought. Finally they reached the base of the outcrop, the rain drumming against the stones and the wind pushing them forward. Luke helped Clara climb onto a small ledge sheltered partially by an overhang of rock, their backs pressed against the cold stone. They huddled together, shivering and soaked, yet grateful for the refuge. The storm continued to rage around them, the sky flashing with lightning and the thunder rolling across the plains, but for the first time that day they felt a small measure of safety. Clara leaned against Luke, her teeth chattering slightly, yet her eyes filled with trust and admiration. She could feel the tension draining slowly from her muscles, the storm outside echoing the turbulence of their lives, yet inside the small shelter a quiet calm settled over them. Their journey had been perilous and the confrontation with Mason was still in the back of their minds, yet in this moment the threat seemed distant and manageable. Luke reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small oil lantern he had carried for emergencies. He lit it carefully, the flame flickering against the wet walls of the rock, casting warm light and long shadows that danced across the ledge. Clara watched him, the glow highlighting his determined expression and the protective stance he maintained. Her heart swelled with gratitude and affection for the quiet drifter who had risked everything to save her and who now shared both warmth and courage in the midst of the storm. They shared a quiet meal of bread and dried meat that Luke had packed for emergencies, eating slowly, letting the sound of rain and occasional thunder punctuate their silence. Clara spoke softly, occasionally commenting on the storm, the wild beauty of the plains, and the determination that had brought them this far. Luke responded with reassuring words, occasionally making her laugh lightly, a sound that felt fragile yet comforting against the backdrop of the tempest. The hours passed, the storm showing no sign of relenting, yet their spirits remained strong. The shelter protected them from the worst of the wind and rain, and the warmth of their shared body heat provided comfort. Clara realized fully that the trials they faced together only strengthened the bond between them. Each challenge reinforced trust, courage, and affection, creating a connection that could not be easily broken. As the evening approached, the storm gradually abated, the wind dying down and the rain lessening to a soft drizzle. The clouds parted slightly, allowing slivers of sunset to break through, painting the wet plains with streaks of gold and pink. Clara and Luke stepped out of the shelter, stretching tired limbs and taking in the transformed landscape. The trials of the day had tested them, yet they had emerged resilient, united, and ready to face the next phase of their journey together. They moved down the slope of the outcrop hand in hand, their eyes scanning the horizon for a safe path forward. The memory of the storm would linger, a reminder of their perseverance and courage, yet it also became a symbol of the strength they had discovered in one another. The quiet drifter and the young woman promised to another, now choosing their own destiny side by side, facing the vast expanse of Red Mesa with hearts aligned and spirits undaunted. The morning sun rose over Red Mesa, casting warm golden light across the hills and the fields. Clara and Luke stood together at the edge of the outcrop, surveying the vast landscape before them. The storm from the previous day had left the earth fresh and glistening with dew, and the air carried the scent of wet grass and wildflowers. They took a deep breath together, the tension of the past days gradually giving way to anticipation and resolve. Luke adjusted the straps of his pack, checking the supplies he had gathered and ensuring the map of the surrounding territory was secure. Clara watched him, her hands brushing against the worn leather of her own satchel, and she felt a sense of calm determination settling over her. They had survived the confrontation with Mason, the storm, the night ride, and the fear of capture. Now the challenge was to carve a new life for themselves, a path that would allow freedom, choice, and the possibility of love. They began walking down the slope, moving carefully over loose rocks and uneven soil, the landscape wide open before them. Each step was deliberate and measured, yet the excitement of potential and the thrill of independence pushed them forward. Their conversation was quiet, practical, and thoughtful, discussing possible routes, safe places to rest, and strategies to avoid detection from Mason and his men. Yet beneath the practicality ran a current of shared hope and a growing affection that had not yet been named. Clara glanced at Luke, noticing the determination in his eyes, the set of his jaw, and the way he moved with purpose and care. She felt a surge of gratitude and admiration for the quiet drifter who had risked so much to protect her, and for the courage he inspired in her own heart. Each obstacle they faced had forged trust and confidence in one another, building a foundation for a partnership that went beyond necessity into something deeper, meaningful, and rare. As they moved along a narrow trail bordered by tall grasses and scattered rocks, the sun rose higher, painting the hills with golden light. Their shadows stretched behind them, long and lean, moving in harmony. With each step they paused briefly at a small stream, the water flowing clear and cold, reflecting the sky above. Clara knelt, dipping her hands into the current, the cool water bringing refreshment and clarity as Luke crouched beside her, checking the path ahead and scanning the horizon for potential threats. The trail led them through a wooded section where the trees provided shelter from the midday heat. The sound of leaves rustling in the wind mingled with birdsong, creating a quiet symphony that contrasted with the chaos and danger of previous days. Clara felt a sense of peace in this small oasis, a fleeting moment where fear and tension could be replaced by reflection and connection. They spoke softly, sharing memories, hopes, and fears, their voices carrying lightly through the trees and binding them further together. As afternoon approached, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley stretching for miles below. The expanse was breathtaking, the sun casting long shadows over hills and rivers glinting in the light. The moment felt symbolic, a representation of the journey they had undertaken and the possibilities that lay ahead. Clara and Luke stood side by side, taking in the view, their hands brushing and their hearts beating in quiet alignment. The freedom they sought seemed tangible, as if the landscape itself invited them to claim it as their own. They set up a temporary camp, finding a small hollow sheltered by rocks and trees. Luke gathered firewood and prepared a small meal, while Clara arranged their supplies and tended to the small comforts that would sustain them. The work was simple yet meaningful, each act a contribution to the life they were building, a life chosen deliberately and guided by their shared vision of independence, safety, and connection. Evening descended, painting the sky in muted shades of pink and purple. Clara and Luke sat close together, their shoulders touching the warmth of their bodies, a comfort against the cool night air. They spoke little, letting the silence convey the depth of understanding between them. The trials of the past days had strengthened their bond, and now the shared commitment to move forward together provided clarity and purpose that neither had felt before. As stars appeared over Red Mesa and the night settled softly across the valley, Clara rested her head against Luke's shoulder, feeling a sense of certainty and resolve that had eluded her for so long. They had chosen a new path forward, one defined by freedom, love, and courage, and each step they would take together would reinforce the trust and connection that had been forged through danger, hardship, and the quiet moments of shared understanding. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, the promise of adventure and challenge waiting, yet tempered by the confidence of shared purpose. Clara and Luke moved forward side by side, their hearts aligned, their steps deliberate and their spirits undaunted, ready to face the unknown and carve a life together on the vast open plains of Red Mesa, the future theirs to shape and define. The sun climbed high over Red Mesa, casting golden light across the rolling hills and the winding trails that led back to the ranch. Clara and Luke moved steadily through the familiar terrain, their eyes scanning the horizon and their senses alert to every sound and movement. The journey had been long and treacherous, yet each step brought them closer to the place that had once been a symbol of fear, control, and obligation, now transformed into a stage for courage, resolution, and the possibility of reclaiming what had been lost. Clara's heart beat quickly, her thoughts a mixture of anticipation, dread, and determination. She had feared this moment for weeks, the confrontation with Mason looming large in her memory, yet she knew that avoiding the ranch would not resolve anything. The past had to be faced if the future was to be claimed, and the life she longed for with Luke could truly begin. Their steps fell in rhythm, their movements deliberate, their connection unspoken yet palpable as they approached the familiar landscape. Luke's hand brushed against hers occasionally, a reminder of presence, support and protection. Each glance carried reassurance and calm. In the face of what lay ahead, the ranch came into view, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings, fences and corrals stretching across the dusty plain, the scent of animals and the dry earth heavy in the air. The sight evoked memories, both painful and powerful, memories of promises broken, threats unspoken, and a young woman caught between duty and desire. They slowed their pace, approaching the main house, cautiously surveying the yard and the surrounding fields. Clara could feel her pulse quicken, yet the fear was tempered by the trust she placed in Luke, the quiet drifter who had risked everything for her freedom and for her heart. She drew a deep breath, centering herself, and allowed Luke to guide the steps forward, their shadows stretching across the ground as they moved toward the gate. Mason stood at the entrance, the same cold expression on his face, the weight of entitlement and anger visible in every gesture. His eyes narrowed as he noticed Clara and Luke approaching, his presence commanding the attention of the nearby workers and townsfolk who had gathered to witness the encounter. The tension was immediate, palpable and heavy, as if the air itself had thickened with anticipation, fear and unresolved conflict. Clara stepped forward, her chin lifted, her eyes meeting Mason's with resolve. "I am not here to cause trouble," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I am here to claim my life and my choice, and I will not be intimidated or controlled." Luke's hand found hers, a grounding presence, his gaze unwavering on Mason, ready to protect and support Clara as needed. The silence between the three of them stretched long and tense, the world around fading into insignificance compared to the charged energy of confrontation. Mason spoke slowly, carefully, his words measured and deliberate. "You have no right," he said, and yet there was an unmistakable edge of surprise in his tone, a flicker of doubt that Clara noticed and seized upon. The townsfolk murmured among themselves, sensing the shift in power, the courage of Clara and the unwavering support of Luke, defying the expectations and assumptions that had once bound her. Luke moved slightly forward, placing himself between Mason and Clara, his stance calm, protective and authoritative. The quiet drifter, whose loyalty, courage and heart had carried them through the storm, now stood firm, a shield and partner, a man who had proven that love and respect outweighed fear and force. Clara felt a surge of gratitude and confidence, knowing that together they could face anything the world might throw at them. The confrontation stretched across minutes that felt like hours. Mason's pride wrestled with reality, the control he once assumed slipping through his fingers. The workers and townsfolk watched silently, holding their breath as the dynamics shifted slowly, irreversibly. The determination in Clara's eyes, the strength in Luke's stance, and the undeniable truth of their bond left no room for coercion, manipulation, or threat. Finally, Mason's jaw tightened and he took a step back, a begrudging acknowledgement of defeat and a tacit recognition that Clara's life would not be dictated by him. The tension remained, yet a shift had occurred, a subtle but definitive change that allowed Clara and Luke to step fully into their own future. Their hands found each other tightly, a silent promise of unity, courage and love as they moved past the ranch house and into the open fields. The sun continued its climb, casting warm light over the land. Clara breathed deeply, feeling the weight of fear and doubt lift and the possibility of freedom and happiness solidify. The past had been confronted, the choice reclaimed, and the partnership affirmed. Each step away from the ranch a step toward a life built on trust, love and determination, a life together shaped by their courage, choices and commitment to one another. As they moved down the familiar trails, the wind carrying the scent of earth and grass, their hearts were light, their spirits resilient. They had returned to the place of threat and control, yet emerged stronger, united and ready to embrace the future, a future defined not by obligation but by love, mutual respect and the promise of shared days under the vast skies of Red Mesa. The sun rose slowly over Red Mesa, casting a soft golden light across the hills and the open plains. Clara and Luke walked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, their eyes meeting in quiet understanding. The journey had been long and fraught with danger, uncertainty and fear, yet each challenge they had faced together had strengthened their bond and solidified the connection that had grown from trust and shared courage into something deeper and enduring. The trails beneath their boots were familiar, yet each step now felt different, imbued with purpose, hope and the quiet certainty of love. They moved toward the small cabin they had claimed as their own, a place that had once been a temporary refuge but now symbolized the life they had fought for and the freedom they had earned. Clara's heart swelled as she thought of the path that had led them here, the escape from Mason, the storm, the night rides and the endless hills, each moment a piece of the story that had brought them to this day. Luke glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips, his eyes warm and steady. The quiet drifter who had once appeared suddenly in her life had become her protector, partner and confidant. The fear that had once shadowed her every move had been replaced by the reassurance of his presence and the knowledge that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Clara squeezed his hand lightly, feeling the strength and sincerity of his grip and the unspoken promise that he would never let her face the world alone. They reached the cabin, a modest structure with weathered wooden walls and a small porch, the roof patched and sturdy. The windows reflected the morning light and the surrounding landscape of hills and scattered trees. The place smelled faintly of smoke and earth and the subtle warmth of wood that had absorbed the seasons. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, a place where the trials of the past could be laid aside and a future of choice, love, and shared life could be embraced fully. Clara opened the door and stepped inside. Luke, following close behind. Their footsteps echoed softly across the wooden floor, the familiar creaks and groans of the cabin a comforting reminder that they had arrived at a place of safety and belonging. She set down her satchel and looked around the small space, imagining the life they would build together, the meals they would share, the quiet evenings by the fire, and the laughter and conversation that would fill the rooms with warmth. Luke set down his pack and knelt to inspect the hearth, arranging a few logs and striking a match. Soon a small fire flickered to life, filling the room with warmth and a gentle glow. The simple act felt monumental, a symbol of their ability to create comfort and stability in a world that had often been harsh and unpredictable. Clara watched him, her heart full of admiration and love, knowing that it was not the cabin or the fire alone that brought her comfort, but the presence and partnership of Luke. They spent the day tending to the small tasks that made the cabin a home, gathering firewood, repairing a loose shutter, and arranging the few pieces of furniture they had with care and intention. Each act was infused with meaning, each gesture a reflection of their commitment to a life built together. The work was simple yet rewarding, a tangible expression of their shared purpose and mutual respect. As evening fell, the sky painted in hues of pink and purple. Clara and Luke sat side by side on the porch, the firelight flickering through the open windows and the scent of earth and wildflowers surrounding them. They spoke softly of dreams, hopes, and plans, the quiet intimacy of the conversation reinforcing the depth of their connection. Their laughter mingled with the evening breeze, the simplicity of the moment yet profound in the affirmation of love earned through perseverance, trust, and shared experience. The stars emerged one by one over Red Mesa, and the night air carried the whisper of wind through the hills. Clara rested her head against Luke's shoulder, feeling the steady warmth and heartbeat of the man who had come to mean so much to her. The trials of the past weeks had shaped them, tested them, and ultimately bound them together, forming a love that had been forged through courage, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. As they gazed at the vast expanse of plains and hills, their hands intertwined, their hearts aligned. They understood fully that their love was not a fleeting spark but a steady flame, a guiding light that would sustain them through the days and nights to come. The journey from fear and uncertainty to trust, choice, and devotion had brought them to a place of clarity, peace, and profound happiness. The dawn of a new day stretched before them, Red Mesa glowing softly in the morning light. Clara and Luke embraced the future with hearts open and spirits resilient. Their love had found its way through obstacles, dangers, and challenges, and now stood strong, steady, and unwavering, a testament to the power of trust, courage, and the quiet determination to choose each other above all else. Together they stepped forward into the open fields of Red Mesa, the wind carrying the scent of freedom and the promise of life shared fully and completely. Their journey had ended, yet in many ways it had only just begun. The love that had found its way now guiding every step and illuminating every horizon, the quiet drifter and the young woman united in heart, purpose, and devotion, ready to face whatever the world might bring with courage, patience, and love.